your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney met with media earlier this week to announce a cabinet shuffle. Tyler Shandro resigned as health minister, but will be switching portfolios with Minister Jason Copping. Copping becomes the province's new health minister, while Shandro takes over as the Minister of Labour and Immigration. Meanwhile, Alberta's new health minister, Jason Copping, says he's committed to steering the province through this current crisis and, quote, on to better days.
We obviously have immediate and significant pressures on our healthcare system right now, and I step into this role resolutely committed to building immediate capacity. However, we also know that COVID-19 is not likely to go anywhere anytime soon. But today I would like a commitment to look forward. I'll be working on 3 key issues to shift how we manage COVID-19. First, increasing our baseline hospital capacity permanently. Second, educating vaccine-hesitant Albertans to get more Albertans immunized. And third, preparing our health system to more adequately respond to potential future waves of COVID-19.
The head of Alberta Health Services says so many people are being admitted to ICUs each day that medical staff can only keep up because of the number of deaths from COVID-19. Dr. Verna Yu says hospitals have admitted 24 or more critically ill COVID patients on average each day since last Sunday. She says there were 310 patients as of Thursday in intensive care, the vast majority of them with COVID and most of them not fully vaccinated or only partially vaccinated. Alberta normally has 173 ICU beds, but has increased that number to 350 by taking over extra spaces, such as operating rooms, and reassigning staff. The result is non-urgent surgeries have been canceled across the province, including transplants, cancer operations, and surgeries on children. Now, in this next story, BCN's Naveen Day speaks with patients who are frustrated about facing more delays.
It can take months or even years to have your non-urgent medical procedure scheduled. So imagine the dismay you would experience if you were called and told that your surgery has been postponed indefinitely. That was the sad reality for many Albertans recently. And last week, I spoke with 2 Lethbridge residents who say they have lost their scheduled procedure dates.
I was due for hip replacement on my left hip on Monday of this week. They said that elective surgery was cancelled until further notice.
I'm having to have steel rods put in my upper legs. Been waiting over 5 years now for these surgeries. I went in about 2 weeks ago up to Calgary to the surgeon where I was appointed at, and now everything's being put on hold.
Both Wilson and Ross were told over the phone that their procedures, which required overnight stays, were cancelled in order to free up beds that may be needed due to a rise of COVID-19 cases. While they understand that things can get delayed during a pandemic, they are frustrated that they have to keep their lives on hold.
I'm very frustrated. It's just, I'm trying to get myself fixed up, trying to get myself better, trying to make my own life better, and just this COVID thing is just holding everybody back.
It took a year to get in to see for a consult, and then it's taken now till another year to get a date. So, of course, I am frustrated now because, of course, we don't know how long it will be before I'll be rescheduled.
Earlier this month, 9 Alberta post-secondary institutions announced that all students, visitors, and teachers will have to be fully vaccinated against COVID to enter the schools. Well, not everyone is in favor of that idea. Some protesters gathered outside of the University of Lethbridge on Thursday afternoon to say no to mandatory vaccines.
It shouldn't be up to any governing body to decide what goes into another person's body. It should be our choice no matter what. So whether you're pro-vaccine or you're anti-vaccine, either way, we should all have the right to choose what goes into our body, especially where there's risk, there should be a choice. When you talk to people who come to these rallies and these protests, majority of them have received all their vaccines, they're up to date. It's not that we're anti-vaccine, it's that we're pro-choice and that we don't feel like it's going to end here. that it's going to end with vaccines. It's going to continue to escalate to other things is truly what we believe and what I believe.
Mandatory vaccinations will be required starting on November 1st to enter the campus unless students and staff can provide a medical exemption. Coming up, proof of vaccination to enter Alberta businesses began abruptly this week, but has it gone smoothly? We tell you after the break. Welcome back. Beginning this week, Alberta business owners had to choose whether they'll be asking patrons for their proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test before entering their establishment, or they can choose to not ask people for their records but go back to reducing their occupancy to 1/3 of their business's fire code capacity, which essentially puts them back into restriction mode. Some people are saying this is the government's way of downloading the liability onto business owners and that they could suffer again. Annie Dormuth is with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and she joined me earlier this week to discuss how establishments have been handling this abrupt change. Take a look.
Well, definitely a lot of confusion and frustration for Alberta small businesses through, I would have to say, a very rushed rollout of the province's restriction exemption program, which essentially is a proof of vaccination program where for certain industries, you can either choose to have a proof of vaccination program, or you can choose to go under certain restrictions. So for the restaurant industry, that would be the complete closure of all indoor dining. Well, for the fitness industry, for example, that would be the complete closure of all in-person group classes. So with all of this, business owners, I would have to say, are simply trying to rapidly adjust their operations. Most provinces that have gone through this at least provided business owners a week notice, provided guidance to business owners within a week of it being imposed on them. Whereas here in the province, of course, as we all know, the announcement came late Wednesday. And if you can believe it, the public health orders and guidance to business owners were made available online at Saturday evening around 8:00 p.m. So that really gave business owners a day notice to prepare as well. They also made the last minute decision over the weekend to exclude all retail from being able to access the restriction exemption program, which meant that retail across the province is now restricted at 1/3 capacity. So I would have to say this has just been a couple days of adjustment and a lot of stress for business owners.
What are you hearing from businesses across the province about this? Which way are people going to be leaning? Are they leaning more towards that vaccine passport, the exemption program, or are they going to simply go back to the fire code restrictions, the capacity restrictions?
Well, we're mostly hearing businesses go through the way of proof of vaccination again, just to keep their operations as open as possible. However, that still means they are losing customers at the door, which again is why we are calling on the provincial government to reopen provincial support mechanisms and funding made available to business owners, to those that are under the capacity restrictions, such as retail, as well as those that are under the restriction exemption program, because then they are still under a technical restriction. They are still going to be losing customers and also need new funding made available to them to basically follow this program. For example, if businesses want to hire additional staff to check that proof of vaccination at the door, as well as businesses potentially looking at buying QR scanners at the door as well when the QR code becomes available across the province. So we do strongly call on the provincial government to once again open up direct grant supports for small businesses. The easiest way to do this, of course, is reopening its previously closed SME relaunch grant and make that funding available to business owners immediately.
Mm-hmm. And you did mention the QR code, and of course that could take quite a while to roll out. Is there a lot of confusion by businesses that you're talking to as to how this is supposed to be implemented?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth between public health on clarifying some of the guidelines in the restriction exemption program. For example, does an Uber Eats driver have to be vaccinated when entering the business if that business is under the REP? All of those questions are swirling around, and unfortunately, not a lot of guidance made available to by the provincial government to business owners online. They pretty much are going with some broad-based guidelines made available online. But of course, a lot of that does not answer their questions.
It's very concerning, I'm sure, if they're looking at possibly receiving a fine for something like this. So how are businesses supposed to enforce this also? Are you hearing concerns?
Business owners are hanging on by a thin thread who are in the RRP. These are the businesses that have been hardest hit by prolonged restrictions for over 18 months. They are doing their best to ensure that their business does survive. I call on all Albertans, if you have a problem with the RAP, to take up your concerns to your local MLA and your provincial government, and not to the business owner or its staff.
Annie Dorma, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, always great to be on the show.
Welcome back. Well, what a week it's been in politics. The federal election creates a couple of red cracks and a blue sea of conservative votes in Alberta. Plus, Alberta's upcoming municipal election will have 2 referendum questions, and Premier Kenney shuffles his cabinet. I sat down with Western Standard News editor Dave Naylor to hash it all out. Take a look. So big announcement this week with Premier Jason Kenney. We've got Tyler Shandro, who was Alberta's health minister, and Jason Copping, who was the labor and immigration minister, essentially switching positions. So why do you think Kenney did this? I know Kenney's now saying that it was Shandro who put in his resignation, but what do you think is going on there?
Kenney is just trying to quell internal caucus debate on his COVID restrictions that he brought in last week. It erupted. MLAs are calling for his resignation now. So he did this purely as a political move to try and get the caucus under control. He says he did not fire Shandro. He says that he handed in his resignation and it was accepted, and it was time for a fresh start. At his press conference, Kenney said the move was in no way, shape, or form political, because he is laser focused on leading the government through this COVID crisis, which is getting more of a mess each day. And astonishing death toll was announced yesterday: 29 Albertans passing away from COVID in only 24 hours. So it was a move to quell cabinet unrest or caucus unrest. And whether it works or not, I guess will remain to be seen.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, do you think that this will make much of a difference going forward for them?
Well, they're meeting as we speak on Wednesday afternoon. Some MLAs have told us they will openly question the Premier's leadership. The Premier says to do that now would be grossly irresponsible. We've got to get through this COVID vaccine, COVID crisis, and then we can talk about it. There is a leadership leadership review planned for late 2022. That, of course, would only give the party 6 months before the next election if they were going to replace Kenney, if he lost such a vote. So I guess it's a question whether or not the MLAs think they have the numbers today to bring up Kenney's leadership. I personally think that if it doesn't happen today, Kenney is still a dead man walking, because you've got opposition all the way from the grassroots, dozens and dozens of constituency associations calling for his removal. And you've got all the way up to the vice president of the party, vice president of policy, Joel Mullen, in an open letter saying Kenney needs to be removed immediately for the good of the province and the good of the party.
This past Monday was a big day across Canada with the federal election. Now, in Calgary, Dave, we're hearing about a red crack in a blue shield where a Liberal candidate won in mainly Conservative surrounding. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, that was the riding of Calgary, Calgary Skyview, George Sahal. He was a very popular local councillor in the northern ward in the city. He was well liked by his constituents. He decided he was going to run for federally for the Liberal Party, and even brought in Justin Trudeau during the campaign. So, as you know, Justin Trudeau is basically a swear word in Calgary. But he took his local popular personality and he won that riding. The Liberals, the Tories, excuse me, also lost a couple of seats in Edmonton. Edmonton Griesbach incumbent Kerry Diot was defeated by an NDP candidate. So the PPC may be to blame. They took 8% of the votes in Alberta. That may have been enough to cost Kerry the seat in Edmonton Griesbach. But there was certainly a few surprises on Monday evening for sure.
There definitely is. And now you mentioned the PPC. So when it comes to the PPC, do you think that they actually split the vote in certain areas of the country? So do you think if it hadn't been for them that those votes may have gone to the Conservatives?
It's hard to say. Certainly, Jason Kenney admitted yesterday at his press conference most of those voters would have likely voted for him in the last provincial election.
Up next, talk of a potential early leadership review for Premier Kenney. Legislative reporter Tyler Dawson has the details, but first, a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Could there be an early leadership review for Alberta's Premier? Our own Hal Roberts caught up with National Post legislative reporter Tyler Dawson to discuss. Take a look.
Tyler, let's talk about this mini cabinet shuffle with the UCP. Even though Premier Kenney says Shandro resigned as health minister, was this more of a case that he needed to move on?
The government is at a point where they are sort of snowed in with criticism, whether that's from progressives on the outside of the party and people within the party, some on the sort of pro-public health measure side, some on the side that think the government's gone too far. And Tyler Shandro obviously has largely been part of the public face of this government. And so he's been the person taking some of the criticism from the outside and internally. So, there's a little bit of an attempt, I think, to put a new face in, to get a fresh start, as the Premier said, on this file. So there's that. There's also the other side of it, which is that this has been a brutal 2 years for Tyler Shandro, and the Premier alluded to that on Tuesday evening when he spoke about it. And when you look back to the incident in the summer when his family was chased by protesters, you have to imagine that it's taking something of a personal toll on Tyler Shandro as well. So I think almost certainly there's a couple factors here at play, both the political and sort of the personal, where Shandro might have been looking for a change.
Now, will moving Jason Copping into the health minister portfolio help the government save face and maybe rebuild trust with Albertans?
Well, I don't know if it will help rebuild trust with Albertans. What it might help is one of the longer term priorities with the government, which is the negotiations with healthcare workers. Tyler Shandro built up a lot of animosity on that file while he was health minister, and bringing in Jason Copping is, a new person at the table. That might be something that could help reset that relationship. And then, the other thing I think is sort of, any politician who's in one role for a considerable period of time, I think tends to fall into a bit of a routine, whether that's talking points, whether that's the way they interact with reporters, the way they are perceived by the public. And this can be for good or for ill, I think. So in that sense, bringing in a new person might be a little bit of a reset on the relationship the public and reporters have with the health minister. Is that going to, dramatically change the government's policy, the government's approach to the pandemic, or any of the other issues it's facing? I expect not. But just to have a new face in there, who doesn't have the baggage perhaps that Tyler Shandro had, I mean, it can't hurt, I guess, is what I'm saying at the end of the day.
Was there no one in the cabinet who came from a medical background whom Kenney could have considered as health minister, like maybe a former doctor or a nurse?
It's a bit of a strange thing. I mean, you look at the federal Liberals and have Patty Hajdu, who I believe has a medical background, and so you would think maybe out of the 60 or so people in caucus, there would be someone who had a medical background, and I don't think there is. Lots of business people, lots of lawyers, things like that, but it doesn't actually look like there's anyone with a medical background or a public health background. So, it is probably, arguably, a bit of a skills gap in the bench strength of the United Conservatives right now.
Now, there appears to be a little bit of division growing within the United Conservative Party caucus. Some are feeling a leadership review could be on the way for Premier Kenney. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's sort of two things happening here. The first is the internal caucus dispute, and that's been going on for a long time, but it seems to have intensified lately. Throughout the pandemic, there's been a handful of people who have been, vocal opponents of the government's agenda on handling the pandemic. Drew Barnes was one of these people until he was ejected from caucus. So there's that side of it. On the internal side as well, there's the people who say that the government hasn't done enough, hasn't moved fast enough. You've Richard Gottfried from Calgary, who criticized the government last week in a Facebook post. You Leela Ahir, who said on Tuesday that Kenney should have resigned. She told that to Don Braid, a colleague at the Calgary Herald. So you have that sort of going on internally. And whether or not those sides sort of come together to be, really mad at Kenney sort of remains to be seen. But the other thing that's going on here is this sort of grassroots level revolt. And so basically the party has an internal mechanism that will govern a leadership review. And it seems at this point like that's on track to happen at the United Conservative annual general meeting in March 2022. Now, what some of these grassroots constituency organizations, one member of the board itself of the United Conservative Party are saying is that this leadership review needs to be moved up. That could be moved up to the November convention that's being held. Perhaps there's another possibility of time. But so that's the other thing that's sort of going on. And that requires a certain number of constituency associations to get on board with that review to initiate the process.
Thanks so much, Tyler.
Coming up after the break, we bring you some of the top local stories from around southern Alberta. Stay with us. We are days into the restriction exemption program in Alberta, and so far the message from restaurants in Lethbridge has been somewhat positive. For businesses using the new exemption program, customers need to show proof of vaccination upon entry. General Manager of Hudson's Tap House in Lethbridge, Jesse Dixon, says so far customers have been easy to work with.
Overall, the response has been positive. Nobody's come in with a negative attitude about it. The one thing we weren't clear on was if we could use our outdoor space. So we have had a little bit confusion about that because we were under the impression we could, but because we're part of the restriction exemption program, we cannot use any of our dining space, indoor or outdoor, for unvaccinated or without proof of negative tests.
Along with the vaccine passport, you will also be required to show a piece of government ID when entering any establishment. Nomination papers for the municipal election had to be in by noon on Monday. 4 current Lethbridge city councillors and 1 former Lethbridge mayor have put their names forward to be re-elected on October 18th. Carson Marzouk has the breakdown of each candidate and where they stand on various issues.
4 city councillors and 1 former mayor have all filed their nomination papers for the upcoming municipal election. Belinda Crowson has served on council for 1 term. She says she wants to be a part of council and continuing to make a change for the city.
One of the things I have been talking to is a lot of young entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of businesses starting in Lethbridge, new ideas, and they need a council, and they need a Lethbridge to support them, and I'd love to be part of that. I would love to be part of continuing to build a better Lethbridge.
Another familiar face seeking re-election is Mark Campbell. He says one of the issues he hopes to bring back to council if re-elected is Lethbridge's social issues.
One of the big problems that we have is we don't have enough facilities. So to create partnerships with either the federal or provincial government to find out where we can, create affordable housing.
As well, Ryan Parker is seeking his 8th term on council, and he says he's hoping to add another 4.
Try to make our community safe as a place for people to raise a family. And by doing so, we need to make sure that our police have the the appropriate funds in place. And also, we have to make sure we have the services to help these folks out.
Advanced voting will start on October 1st, and five-term councillor Jeff Carlson will be one of the names listed on the ballot.
I still have a passion for this work. I do enjoy the work. I'm very dedicated to it, dedicated to our city. So that's always driving me, is the desire to continually make Lethbridge the best place to live, work, play, and grow.
Another well-known name is also eyeing a spot in council chambers. Reiko Dodick served as a two-term city councillor and the mayor before stepping back. He says he hopes to address the pay-as-you-go and police budget.
And you've seen that council has, in fact, from time to time reduced the police budget, and then every once in a while they'll put some back into it. And policing is one of the things that I don't think you should be tinkering with too much.
As for current city councillor Joe Morrow, he has decided to not seek re-election. For Bridge City News, I'm Carson Marceau.
Thank you, Carson. Sticking with the municipal election, the City of Lethbridge announced new information and its efforts in the lead up to the election. There will be 2 ballots for voters to fill out this year, a municipal one including mayoral, city councilor candidates, and school board trustees. The provincial one will include the 2 referendum questions. Advance voting for anyone opens on October the 1st, and voters can vote at any polling station in the city.
The first advance vote would be the weekend of the 1st, and that takes place here at City Hall on Friday and Saturday. Voting hours are from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. The second weekend is in the east at the exhibition. It's a drive-through strictly, and so people can vote from their cars. And that's also an added safety precaution with COVID-19. And then the third weekend will be in the west. It'll be at the ATV Center, and it will run on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
There are 6 mayoral and 32 city councilor candidates running for this year's election. Lethbridge Transit has been gathering information and bus rider feedback since the new CityLink network was implemented in August. There are 4 major demand zones in the city, and riders can book a demand ride where a bus will pick them up by using an app or by calling 311. General Manager for Lethbridge Transit, Tim Sanderson, says transit has met the goal of speeding up efficiency with on-time performance being at 25%. There is also a 6.8% reduction of riders needing a transfer. Each quarter, transit reviews its service levels and makes adjustments. The next review is slated for November. We have a municipal election coming up, and the race for mayor is on. Up next, we speak with mayoral candidate Colton Menzak about his platform. But first, a quick break.